pulled something from this Shulchan Aruch Harav website. Anyway, so about davening, Damon, stop me when you need to. Okay.
Sure, no problem.
So all aspects I'm going to try to cover, many aspects. So when we put tefillin on in the morning, it says here, what happens if we have, I've got an upset stomach, or we're not feeling great, but particularly in the bowel area or that part of the body. So it says here, what would the din be in the following circumstance? If a person has a windy stomach but has no need to the bathroom, and if a person is experiencing stomach pain. So what does it say about those two cases in terms of putting on or wearing or putting on tefillin? So the answer is, if a person has a windy stomach and is unable to refrain from occasionally passing wind, it's forbidden to put on tefillin. However, if a person has a stomach ache, but this does not cause him to pass wind or require him to use the bathroom, the pain would be no different from elsewhere in the body, and one would be permitted to put on tefillin. And it says here in Shulchan Aruch in the Orach Chaim, chapter 38, verse 1, he writes that somebody who is a chole me'ayim, which means someone with digestive problems, is exempt from wearing tefillin, for the reason being that the tefillin requires a guf naki, which translates to a clean body. And while we're still on the subject, it says, and excuse me if you guys are eating. I hope you. Okay, I'm not. I don't see. Which are you? Okay,
no, you can.
So talking about stomach issues.
Yeah.
Continue.
Continue.
Digestive issues. Okay, then we'll finish with this theme of. Okay, it says flatulence with tefillin. What exactly are the practical halachas of tefillin and flatulence? If one has any suspicion that he may need to go to the bathroom, he must abstain from wearing them, that is, take them off. And the answer to this is, there's no need to abstain from wearing tefillin because of a suspicion one may need to flatulate. However, while wearing tefillin, one must avoid the passing of flatulence and stop oneself from doing so. If one feels that he cannot stop oneself and says this is unusual, tefillin, or at least the head tefillin, should be quickly removed. If one remove one's tefillin in order to pass wind, one should recite a new blessing upon putting them back on. Only somebody who has a stomach ailment and who will constantly need to use the bathroom should refrain from wearing tefillin until his stomach is in order. Okay, then last one about this issue. Can I just say it quickly?
Sure.
Damon, you happy with it? Another minute.
Sure, I'm happy. I'm happy.
Passing gas while wearing tefillin, and the question is, I know that one is not allowed to pass gas while wearing. So this is a question was written to this another website that I found. What are the parameters of this din? If one is wearing tefillin and senses the urge to pass gas for the first time, must he remove the tefillin right away, or must he only remove the tefillin if he notices himself repeatedly breaking wind, passing gas? Okay, and the answer is, a person wearing tefillin must not pass gas even once. When a person wears tefillin, he is strapping himself with the name of Hashem. As you know, you create the Shema on the shel yad, and the head completes it. Similar to the Kohen Gadol wearing tzitzit, he may not defile it even once. If you feel you have to pass gas and you cannot hold it, if you have to and you can hold it and control it, no problem. If not, remove the tefillin immediately. There are poskim that say fasting gas while wearing tefillin is asur min haTorah. And others say that passing gas while wearing tefillin is worse than it falling on the floor. Gee, that's quite... Okay, so that's... Okay.
A1. So we were analyzing the Mishnah on 55b, which said if one's animal accidentally fell into a garden and derived benefits from its produce, he pays for what it benefited. Okay. Now, we did discern there's a difference between paying for the damage it did compared to paying what it benefited. So there's two sorts of benefits. The one benefit is the produce below acted as a cushioning to stop the animal splatting one or two floors below in its fall, and therefore it benefited by almost having a cushioning mechanism when it landed to save it from full impact of solid concrete. The second sort of benefit is when the animal obviously fell, got up and ate in the food around it, because that's an animal's instinct to eat once it shook itself off, and then the owner's still looking around to figure out where the heck his animal went. And then you can say if the animal was on the top floor and fell, he's now got to go around the mountain to try and find out what field he fell in. It's not so easy. So it gives the animal in the meantime time to have a bit of graze. So the owner benefited by not having to feed the animal its next meal, and therefore has to compensate the damaged party for that equivalent. Now, when we say benefited compared to damage, damage means you literally pay for the damage you caused at a much higher level, not the equivalent of the animal's cheap animal food, because that's what it says when you benefit. Okay, so that's the discernment. And then the discussion was, well, why do you pay what you benefited and not what you damaged? Well, the simple reason is that there was no negligence here. The animal accidentally fell to a private property below. It wasn't led there on purpose by the animal's owner, nor was it being unwatched. It was an accident, and therefore there's no full payment due. That's number one. Number two, it brings a discussion by Rav, who said the Mishnah refers to an animal that was struck by the produce. What does it mean, was struck by the produce? It meant it fell on the produce and was saved from injury, but the produce was crushed in the process. So the Gemara asked, but this implies if it ate the produce, he would not have to pay even for that which it benefited. Rather, he would be completely exempt. Why would we think that logic? Because of 47a, that Rav is consistent with his reasoning elsewhere. For Rav, it said, if an animal became sick from eating another's food, the owner of the food is not liable, because he can claim she shouldn't have eaten it. So in other words, I've got a pot plant with poison ivy, and I'm storing all my pot plants at my neighbor. Without permission, the animal ate the poison ivy and died. And then the owner says, well, you're responsible. I said, well, nobody forced the animal to eat. So they're saying maybe Rav is consistent and suggests the same opinion here. The Gemara rejects it. On what basis? It's not a valid comparison, because there it was a case where the animal was harmed. This is the case where the animal is doing the damage. So it's not the same thing. So therefore, there's no automatic exemption. So in view of this difficulty, the Gemara is going to reinterpret the Bryce. And what is it saying is, Rav is speaking in the style of not only but even. What does it mean? That is, not only where the animal ate the produce does its owner pay for what it benefited, but even when it was struck by the produce and was therefore saved by injury, he pays for what it benefited. So, as I said, it seems to say not only but even, but in both cases, as the owner of the animal, you pay for what the animal benefited, either by not having to need its next meal, or by the fact that its impact was cushioned by produce below. Okay, so obviously it changed tact, and it said, because you might have thought there was this case that we learned from a brisa, and that case from a brisa was when a person chased a lion away from his fellow's property. In other words, he's performing a mitzvah of saving his fellow's animal from damage. So since we don't compensate him for that particular case, because he's being rewarded with a mitzvah, maybe we think that the owner of the produce did a mitzvah by saving his fellow's Jew's animal from being splattered, and therefore he doesn't deserve compensation. And therefore, Rav informs us that he's actually liable to pay for that amount. And you can't assume the same. Why? Because there are some differences. The first thing that's different is that when the person decides to chase a lion away from one's fellow's property, he's making the choice to do the mitzvah. This case, he's minding his own business, relaxing, or working, or whatever, and all of a sudden he hears something crashing and destroying his vegetable patch. So either the family doesn't have vegetables for the winter season because the animal landed on them, or alternatively, he certainly didn't give his consent. It was an accident. And therefore, why should he have to absorb the loss? Number one, just because he did a mitzvah doesn't mean he necessarily consents to the loss. It's also saying that when you chase a lion away, you're not actually sustaining any loss. I don't know, I beg to differ. If things got pear-shaped, you could land up in ICU. But I don't know if that means that if you decide to do it from your own volition, you waiver any medical health liability from the person whose property you try to save. But for certainly in this case, he wasn't an active volunteer in the mitzvah. It happened to crash in his produce, and therefore he hasn't waived any financial claim at all. So Rav said on that basis he pays. So in other words, one who chases away lions from his fellow's property does so knowingly, whereas this person, the owner of the garden, saved his fellow animal unknowingly. Alternatively, one who chases away a lion from his fellow's property does so without suffering a loss, whereas this person did suffer a loss. Tosfot said it's not either or, it's both cases. Okay? So that's where we got to yesterday. I hope the 1 minute summary helps. It actually wasn't a 1 minute summary, it was a sorry. Don't worry, you won't get covered. So that was a few minute summary. Apologies, but I hope I made it clear. All right, now we're dealing with the next issue. So the Mishnah, we're on 58a1, rules that the owner of the animal doesn't pay full damages because its fall in the garden was unavoidable. The Gemara then defines what type of fall is considered unavoidable in this context. So in other words, the Gemara is asking, how did it fall? Rav Kahana said, it slipped on its urine. Rava said another animal pushed it. So the animal basically, while walking in the public domain adjacent to the garden, slipped on its own urine and fell in the garden. The owner wasn't expected to have anticipated such an occurrence. That's according to Rashi. Now, Rav Kahana says the animal slipped on its urine, and the same law obviously applies when it slipped on a stone, a stick, or anything that wasn't negligence-based and was terrain-based or liquid-based, etc. Now, Rav Kahana's main intent by mentioning urine is to exclude basically things in a different context. Why? Because Rava said another animal pushed it. So in other words, Rava says that you're not liable if another animal pushes your animal. Okay? Whereas basically Rav Kahana says that you are liable for that case because it's mentioning a different case, that it's not talking about a foreign animal that's coming and ramming your animal. You generally have more than one animal. Why? Because it's your livelihood. So what you do is you lead the animals down a public path, and they should be in single file in a row. When you put two animals next to each other, it's likely that one can push the other one off, and therefore it's not the owner of the produce's fault. So the Gemara explains the dispute. It says the one who said that another animal pushed it holds that the owner is certainly exempt where it slipped on the urine, because that's obviously harder to avoid.
Damon, you're freezing up a bit.
Okay, can you hear me? Can you see me now? Guys, can you see?
We can see you, but we didn't hear the last. We can
20
see
seconds.
You, but your voice also became distorted. It was inaudible to hear you. Just repeat the last 2 minutes. That's all.
Okay. So how did it fall? Rav Kahana said it slipped on urine. Rava said another animal pushed it. So the Gemara explains the dispute. The one who said that another animal pushed it, obviously, which is Rava, holds that the owner is certainly exempt when it slipped on urine, which is harder to avoid. However, Rav Kahana said that only slipping on urine or a stone or whatever the case may be is unavoidable. But where another animal pushed it, its owner has acted negligently and must pay for the damage because it's deemed negligence. And the answer is why? Because the owner of the garden can say to him, you should have led the animal one by one. In other words, when the owner led the animals adjacent to the garden, he should have made them walk in single file so that the one wouldn't topple the other in the garden. So his failure to do so constitutes negligence. That's the view of Rav Kahana. According to Rav, a failure to make the animals pass in a single file is not deemed negligence and doesn't render the owner liable. Okay? Now that we've discussed that, we're now discussing more how much do you pay when you're talking about paying for what it benefited. So the Gemara taught above that even if the animal ate the produce in the garden, the owner is only liable for what it benefited and not for what it damaged. So we're going to study what this means. As Arthur quite rightly said yesterday, he was remembering the laws of 1/60th. So we'll go through that. Was it Arthur or was it Kevin?
Me.
Kevin, well done. It was.
Kevin, yeah.
So Rav Kahana said they taught that his liability is limited to what it benefited only where it ate produce in the very bed in which it fell. So in other words, the animal falls from a height, gets up, shakes itself off, notices food around it and starts to chomp. In that case, Rav Kahana says he's off the hook because that's a natural instinct. But if it went from that bed to another bed and ate there, he pays for what it damaged. In other words, it's no longer a case for paying what he benefited. Paying what he benefited means you pay the owner of the produce equivalent to what you would have paid for cheap animal feed because you didn't have to give the animal the next meal. But it's deemed negligence if the animal then has the time to go to another bed of produce and eat there because the owner of the animal should have hurried up to try and find the animal rather quicker. That's according to Rav Kahana. So therefore it pays properly what it damaged. Okay? So it wasn't inevitable as a result of its fall. Fine. Now there are different approaches. So other Rishonim basically say that the Torah imposes liability only where one causes his animal either deliberately or through negligence to enter the field of the victim. Guys, do you remember that verse from Shemot chapter 22 verse 4? And he sends his animal and it consumes in the field of his another. So either he led his animal there or he let his animal escape there. But this is an unavoidable case because the animal fell down. So the owner can't be held responsible for any animal damage his animal does in that field. Even if he could have prevented by removing the animal. And we ask why. Do you have any suggestions, guys? Before I tell you what some of the Rishonim think. Kevin, you might.
Why is not reliable for damage or animal eats stuff, even produce in other in the places where besides where he fell.
So some of the Rishonim basically say, look, he is responsible because the fact that the animal had time to eat in another bed is negligence of the owner for taking his time. And other Rishonim say it's not negligence. Why? Because if you look at Rav Yochanan's view, and then I'm going to ask you the question, Rav Yochanan said even if it went from bed to another bed, and even if it did so all day long, he pays only for what it benefited. This leniency continues to apply until it leaves the garden and then returns there with the owner's knowledge. So Rav Yochanan is different to Rav Kahana because Rav Yochanan said it doesn't matter if it goes from bed to bed all day in that private property, the original owner's off the hook. Why would you think that could be?
Why is the original owner off the hook?
In other words, it only pays for what it benefited, which is the next meal of the animal. In other words, Rav Yochanan maintains that even if the owner had the opportunity to remove the animal, he's not deemed negligent for failing to do so. Why?
It's natural for that animal to eat wherever it is.
I can.
I think.
No, can I try?
Sure.
Okay, isn't it the fact that the animal actually has to leave, and if you eat him just once and he stays there, it's fine. But if he leaves and keeps coming back, that's when he's responsible multiple times because it becomes a habit.
No, you've jumped the gun, but I'm pleased you've done.
Have I again? I'm sorry.
He's there anyway. Maybe that's what Arthur's saying.
I keep jumping.
So let me give you my take. I don't know if it's right either. I'll give you a shot.
Sure.
So if I heard you correctly, I hope I did. So my take on this is, as long as the owner is not the owner of this animal that's fed into the next door neighbor's yard. Arthur, just put Arthur on mute. Sorry, I'm betting to hear anything.
Okay, it's on mute.
Thanks. Thank you, Arthur. As long as the owner is not aware that his animal's there, because I mean, his animal can be there the whole day, and it can cost the next door neighbor a fortune that he's not aware of it. The moment it's brought to his attention that his animal's there, then, in my opinion, he should be fully liable at that point in time. So the moment he leaves and he goes back again, at that point in time, he should be aware. Because if he goes back, he's not going back in by falling. He's going back in through natural means.
Okay, so Gavin is right, agreeing with Arthur in the fact that should the animal not land up in private property as a result of falling and crashing down the mountain pass into private property, that would be an act of negligence. Gavin is right. But the question remains, that why is the owner taking his time to get to the animal down below, to the extent that the animal has time to eat in different flower beds all day long, produce beds?
Well, we're presuming. Give me one second. We're just presuming that he's not aware of it. If he was aware of it, he would rush immediately. If he's aware of it and he's taking his time, then he's completely what's it called? Liable. I'm presuming that the whole day he's not aware of it.
Well, firstly, I think that makes logical sense. They do bring a different reason for Rav Yochanan, but what Gavin's saying to me makes sense. That reason is that, say, for example, it's private property. Am I unstable again? Guys, is it another quality MTN product? Can you hear me now? Guys, can you hear me? Guys, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're unstable. We can hear you, but it's up and down, in and out.
So basically, the issue that was stated, Gemara, as far as Rav Yochanan is concerned, is that you're not thinking of a private property where somebody has a house in Glen Hazel and a cow lands up in his property, and you can ring the doorbell and say, "Excuse me, my cow fell in your property." You're talking about a case where there's different layering. Think of a mountain like Har Nof, Jerusalem, where you've got different layers. And then on the top, there are different fields that are going down the mountain pass. You can't just go into somebody else's field. They might have dogs there to protect the premises. You might get shot. There's not exactly an electric doorbell or telephone you can phone the guy and say, "Listen, my animal fell in." So there would be an issue there of trespassing. So you've got to be a little bit careful in terms of automatically entering somebody else's property. And number two, you've got to know where your animal fell. And it can take time to go down a mountain pass. Falling is easy. Finding it is something else. And also making sure that you don't get eaten by dogs in somebody's private property. So that's why there's an issue of trespassing, according to Rav Yochanan. Okay, but Rav Kahana says exactly like Gavin says, is that if you actually take your time, you're actually fully aware. The minute you're hearing a crash, you're aware, because if you're holding on the animal properly and they're in next to each other, believe me, your hand's going to go back and you're going to see one of your animals disappearing. At that point, if you let it go from one bed to another.
What's it? Which side? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, open for you.
Okay. I won't take long, Kabb. I know you need to go now.
No, but I wasn't aware that he was coming. Let me just check if it is Mark or not. Can you just give me 2 seconds? Because it might not be. You said it's my son. If it's Mark, it might be 2 seconds as well. Give me a second.
Okay.
Just give me a second.
All right, no problem. Just going to pause.
So Damon.
Yeah.
So if the cow fell into the private property and starts eating,
Yeah.
is it based on if once maybe the owner of the cow of the cow doing the eating wasn't aware, and when he became aware, he has to pay damages. Is that what Gavin said? Or the owner of the land, the owner of the private property.
No,
he becomes aware.
No, it's not the owner of the private property. He's very aware when somebody crashes in his field. What happens is that Rav Kahana said that the minute the animal falls, the owner of the animal that fell is aware. And if it starts to take the time to eat in another bed, he's liable to pay for what it damaged, not just for what it benefited. Obviously, Rav Yochanan is a dissenting opinion. It says, no, he's not liable because, firstly, it can take time to go to find where the animal fell to. And secondly, the reality is it's trespassing. You can't just go, if there's wild dogs, into somebody's property and start to walk through. You might not know where you're going towards. It can take time. So therefore, you're not responsible. So Rav Kahana said, if the animal has enough time to go to another bed of produce to eat, you've taken too much time to rescue your animal. You're liable to pay for what it damaged. And Rav Kahana said you're only liable to pay for what it benefited because it takes time and you don't want to trespass. Okay? So as far as that's concerned, as soon as Gavin comes back, we'll do a few more minutes, then we're ready. Okay, just hang on. Let's resume. All right.
Damon.
Yeah.
All right, guys, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
That's good. Okay.
Okay. So, all right, Gavin, bottom line, Rav Yochanan says you're exempt because it takes time to find your animal and you don't want to trespass and get eaten by guard dogs and that sort of thing. And Rav Kahana said, listen, if it has time, the animal, to eat in another flower bed, you've taken too long. That's the bottom line. All right, let's go on quickly. You guys are bright, we can carry on. So Rav Yochanan's statement is clarified. Rav Papa said, do not say that this leniency applies until it leaves the garden with the owner's knowledge and returns with his knowledge. Rather, once it leaves the garden with his knowledge, even if it returns without his knowledge, in other words, it returns to the garden despite the owner's attempts to prevent it from doing so, the owner of the animal is fully liable for subsequent damage. What's the reason for this? Since he guarded it, why should it be fully liable for the damage it caused? Because the owner of the garden can say to him, once it's learned that there's food in my garden, whenever it escapes, it will run there. The animal will surely try to return to the garden at every opportunity. Hence, its owner should have guarded it with a superior manner in order to prevent it from doing so. Okay? So, I mean, that's straightforward, guys. All it's saying is once it learns it's a wonderful food source, if it ever returns to the garden there, then at that point, the animal's owner is liable because he should, at that point, protect his animal from eating in the field of another. That's a classic case of a shame transgression in the private domain. So having presented the law where the animal fell accidentally into the garden, the Mishnah now proceeds to discuss the case where it entered the garden in a conventional manner. In other words, it didn't fall, it walked. So if it went down to the garden in its usual manner and did damage there, the owner pays for what it damaged. Notice it said it paid for what it damaged, not for what it benefited. So that's proper damages. In this case, the owner is fully liable because he should have prevented it from entering the garden. So Rav Yirmiyah inquired, okay, if the animal went down to the garden in its usual manner and caused damage with its birth waters, what is the law? So why is it mentioning the birth waters? Well, it basically was a pregnant animal that gave birth in the garden, and soiled the produce with its secretions. So we're saying, what happens if it's not a classic case of shame? Okay, so the query is clarified. So according to the one who says that in a situation which begins with negligence and ends with an unavoidable mishap, one is liable to pay, there's nothing for you to inquire about, for the owner is surely liable. So what we are saying is, if you're negligent, we learned this with the cover of the pit, remember, that if you're negligent in one regard, it doesn't protect you in another regard. Remember, you made it negligent, not strong enough for camels, and it ended up breaking from worminess. But because you showed negligence, or you got habitual parking fines, you're now not let off the hook for something minor. So it's saying here, look, what did you not watch your animal for anyway? It might have accidentally given birth at that particular time, but had you protected your animal, you wouldn't have been liable. So if it starts in negligence and ends off in an accident, you're still liable. That's the one opinion. Surprise, surprise, there's a different opinion. According to the one who says that in a situation which begins with negligence and ends with an unavoidable mishap, one is not liable to pay, what is the law here? Do we say that the situation which begins with negligence and ends with an unavoidable mishap, and hence he is exempt? Or perhaps we say here that the entire episode is a result of negligence.
Completely frozen.
Okay.
Damon, repeat the last minute. Damon, sorry,
Sure.
the last minute you were completely frozen. Just the last minute.
No problem. Okay. According to the one who says in a situation which begins in negligence and ends in an unavoidable mishap, one is liable to pay. There's nothing for you to inquire about, for the owner is surely liable. What should be a question to you? There are opinions that say in a situation which begins with negligence and ends with an unavoidable mishap, one is not liable to pay. What is the law here? Do we say that this is a situation which began with negligence and ends with an unavoidable mishap, and hence he is exempt? Or perhaps we say that the entire episode is a result of negligence, for since the animal's owner saw that it was close to giving birth, he should have watched it. Okay, and been careful with it. The Gemara responds, lest the question remain unresolved. So we don't know. But the golden rule is, if it says in Exodus chapter 22, verse 4, you should watch your animal and you shouldn't let it escape. Any damage that it does, there's shame, regal, birthing waters, or anything unexpected, is your fault. That is the majority of the opinion. There are opinions that say, listen, the birth waters were accidental, but you let your animal in there. So it remains unresolved. They haven't been able to resolve those two contradicting issues. All right, guys, I think we're done. I want to keep it to under 40 minutes, which we have done.
I just want to ask one question.
Sure.
So let me give you this scenario. I own a Porsche. A guy comes to me. You come to me, Damon. You borrow my Porsche. You smash it, right? Now I'm.
Hang on, fix your mic.
I've only got this, because
It's fine, but it went soft.
Yeah, it's not loud enough.
Sorry, what I used to use is I have to buy a new one.
It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So if I've got a Porsche and you borrow that Porsche, and you smash it, right? I mean, you obviously survive everything, everything goes well. But I mean, even if you dent it, I'm livid, right? So the fact that I don't wring your neck, that's a mitzvah. So I'm saying, why should you have to even pay then? So next time you smash someone's car or you break their LED TV, you can say, listen, you would have wrung my neck, right? Correct. So that's a mitzvah that you didn't do it. So I don't know you anything.
Jeez.
That